The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast welcomes Rolene Marks, our longtime Israel correspondent and international reporter. And today's topic, and it's very sad, Israel is under attack in a way that it has not been in many, many years. And Rolene Marks, first of all, let me express my deepest condolences on behalf of my listening audience, myself, and our nation. I can't imagine what you're going through in Israel. We thank you so much.
I want to say thank you to you. Thank you to our greatest ally, the United States, for standing so resolutely with us. And a special thank you to you, Rob, and your incredible listeners, because we feel your prayers here. We feel your solidarity. This is a nation in the absolute depths of grief right now. We'll talk about the events of the 7th of October, and it's so hard to wrap our heads around the level and the depths of brutality and depravity committed against innocent men, women, children, and babies. The horrific events are going around the world. What happened on Kibbutz Be'eri, what happened on Kibbutz Kfar Aza and at the Supernova Festival. But I feel we've only scratched the surface. We haven't heard about events on the other kibbutzim, the people trying to flee, towns like Sderot and other places. And right now it is just the grief and the sorrow is overwhelming to even contemplate.
You know, Ro, I have noted over the years, as I'm sure many have, as we observe Israel, that you are such a strong people, and out of necessity, but also because you love your country, unlike many other countries in the world, because you've been constantly struggling to just merely exist. So you mentioned how overwhelming the grief is, and yet life is going on in Israel. You can't just stop everything. Tell us about how the people are doing just day to day. I know that it's got to be hard, but in the same way, I know how resilient that you are.
Well, that's exactly it. We are a resilient nation. You know, a good friend of mine wrote a book called Is Resilience. It's about bouncing forward, not necessarily bouncing back. And by the time that the day of the 7th of October had ended, after thousands of rockets had been fired towards Israeli civilians, some of them actually causing significant damage, and then the horrific massacres that we heard about, Prime Minister Netanyahu declared war against Hamas. And I want to be clear, our war is not with the Palestinian people, despite what some in the media would have you believe. Our war is against Hamas. And in the depths of our grief, we have mobilized behind our army, our brave men and women who are now going off to defend our borders, and we've mobilized for each other. So people are doing anything from packing boxes to visiting the sick, to baking for soldiers. I saw a call go out a little earlier that there's a kibbutz slightly to the north. The trees are overburdened with avocados. Can people volunteer and go pick avocados? To packing shelves in supermarkets. For me, I've been doing nonstop media. So wherever we can fill in a gap or support the war effort or raise money or help a soldier or simply help each other, Israelis are doing that. There is not a single person in this country that is not serving the war effort, whether they are donating money. We had an incredible story, an Arab shop owner donated 100 bicycles to kids from the south who are traumatized. And even though there was some in his community who ransacked the store, Israel's business community came together and have raised over 1 million shekels just to help him get back on his feet. So that is the spirit of Israel. People are opening their homes because we now have 500,000 internal refugees, something that you're not going to hear the United Nations talking about, because we've had to evacuate what is left of our citizens of the south and of the north as we face threats on both fronts. So this is Israel. We are heartbroken, but we are not broken.
Ro, let's talk about the latest numbers. They keep growing as more bodies, sadly, are being discovered from this initial massacre. So what are the numbers, the latest that we have on how many were murdered and how many are hostage presently?
Well, the latest number, and this is still expected to rise because the army is still doing a sweep of towns. There were still infiltrators that we caught today. The latest figure of murdered is over 1,400, including several that we thought had been taken hostage by Hamas, but sadly have been found murdered. This includes a 12-year-old little girl, Noya, who was autistic, and an 80-year-old grandmother, Carmela, and a father with his daughter, who he took to all the music festivals. She suffered from cerebral palsy and multiple sclerosis and was dependent on a wheelchair, and they were found last night. So it's 1,400 and rising. And we have our army confirmed today they've notified family of 203 people who have been taken hostage. This number is also expected to rise, including many Americans. I think over 30 Americans are counted amongst the murdered and taken hostage. This was not just an assault on Israel. This was an assault on civilization.
It's a very good way to put it, and yet there are people who are denying this. I've heard stories and disinformation coming out that this is somehow generated by AI. It sounds like the same old, the Holocaust deniers who are still denying, and now we have people making up these stories. Speaking of made-up stories, I wanted to go to the Al-Ali Baptist Hospital story that was completely misrepresented. Would you tell us about this facility and what happened?
Well, before I do that, I want to touch on the issue of massacre denial, because Hamas made a point of recording everything. They took glee in it. They took pleasure in it. They had their GoPros. They uploaded to people's social media, killing their relatives. The level of depravity was beyond human comprehension. Why is it that we had to prove to the deniers and the skeptics that our babies were beheaded, that we had to violate the last tiny shreds of dignity that our dead, murdered, mutilated, and beheaded babies had to satisfy the apologists for barbarity, because they needed to see for themselves that babies were beheaded? Must we apologize? Sorry, our babies were beheaded, but they weren't politely burnt to death. You can hear I'm very emotional and I might cry because this is I knew these communities well, Rob. I've spent a lot of time in Sderot and surrounds. These are families and people known to me and are no longer. And we have to justify to the world that it happened. It's unbelievable. But let's go to the hospital issue, because that's very important. And here I hold media outlets like the BBC, Sky, and many others who didn't stop to think that they were buying right into the rhetoric coming from an internationally recognized terror organization, and ran with the story that Israel had struck a hospital and there were 500 killed. Rob, we're still counting our dead. How did Hamas know within minutes that 500 people had been killed in a hospital strike? So let's go through that, because we do have, and it has been verified by American intelligence, and it's with British intelligence now, all the evidence. At 6:59 on Tuesday evening, a massive salvo of rockets were fired towards Israel, including where I am here in Modi'in, because we are in central Israel. Now, we heard a couple of minutes later that there was an Israeli strike on a hospital, but Al Jazeera happened to be filming there at the time. Now, if you review the video evidence, you can actually see, and the IDF have shown the video footage, and it's all available for anybody who wants to see, and the thermo imaging, the satellite imaging, the stills imaging, you can actually see the arc, the trajectory of the rockets being fired, and it's one that either misfired or broke and came down and hit whatever it hit. There was no Israeli Air Force air activity at the time, and that is according to the published logs. In the light of day, when the fog of war has cleared, the building, the structure of the hospital is still intact. What was hit was the parking lot. And yes, cars were damaged and maybe a few people killed. We still don't know where all these 500 bodies are. Because if there are 500 bodies, you're going to see evidence of that, and you're going to see funerals. For the IDF, the big evidentiary issue is there's no crater. If you are pounding a building with a massive amount of ordnance, you're going to see the ground crater. There's maybe a 30-centimeter little hole in the ground. So we have the proof, including an intercepted voice conversation between a Hamas terrorist and a Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorist, that they had fired from the cemetery next to the hospital, because bearing in mind, these terror organizations fire from within civilian infrastructure, firing their rockets, still happening today, by the way. A short while ago, we had another barrage. So that's 7,000 rockets fired towards Israeli civilians that nobody's talking about. But the one rocket that misfires and lands in the Gaza Strip creates shockwaves around the world. So what we know now is that one of these rockets fell short, which is a very common occurrence and has killed many Palestinians. And you can see the IDF showed a map of the strip. You can see where rockets have fallen short and landed in this car park. But before even stopping to consider the evidence, especially in a time of war, especially in a region that is so, that is a tinderbox, the media just ran away with it. And what have we seen as a result? We have seen a massive surge of anti-Israel, anti-American protests around the world, and horrendous acts of anti-Semitism, including the burning down of a synagogue in Tunisia, a firebomb thrown into a synagogue in Germany, a kids' school having to be evacuated in Rome, a Jewish school, 6 airports in France having to be evacuated, and your Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, saying a short while ago that if any of the embassies around the region, American embassies around the region or around the world, feel under threat because of these pro-Palestinian protests, which we've seen some horrific rhetoric and calls for violence, is maybe to bring the American flag inside so as not to endanger the embassy staff. This is the result of irresponsible, almost like salivating with agenda pushing reporting.
It's very disturbing, and yet we see protests here in the United States Capitol yesterday from groups that purport to somehow be representing Jewish groups, with at least that's in the name. What do you know about these groups that are purporting to be representing the Jewish cause and yet are clearly anti-Jewish groups?
Well, we say they're cosplaying as Jews. They're not Jews. I don't even think they follow any religion. I think they take on what they see as the cause of the day, and that's what they dress up as. So today they're dressing up as Jews who want a ceasefire. I mean, make no mistake, Hamas are equal to ISIS, equal to Al-Qaeda, equal to that whole framework of terror organizations. We know from experience as Americans and Israelis that when you are dealing with monsters like this, you go out to destroy them. That's the only thing that keeps Americans safe and Israelis safe, is that these agents of barbarity around the world that inflict atrocities beyond the imagination, the only way to deal with them is to wipe them out completely.
Rolene, there's been a lot of talk about a two-front war, and many Americans are kind of unfamiliar with the territory in Israel and what this means, and also that there would be some engagement, which I read about overnight, with Hezbollah. Help us to understand the differentiation between Hezbollah and Hamas and the significance of taking on a two-front war.
Well, we have been expecting that should war break out on one front, we could expect it to break out on multiple fronts as well. And the IDF said earlier this week that no matter where the threat comes in the Middle East, we will deal with it. So we are aware that it could explode anywhere. So Hezbollah and Hamas are both terror proxies sponsored by Iran. And I mean, I think we all can see that this is Iran fighting their proxy war with Israel through Hezbollah in the north and Hamas in the south. So Hezbollah have been trying to be opportunistic. We have had several cases over the last week or so of anti-tank missiles being fired at Israeli positions, mortars being fired, attempts at infiltration. So we do have a significant IDF presence on the northern border, trying to keep it quiet. And we do have our army, about 300,000 stationed on the border with Gaza. But we also now have the USS Gerald Ford off the coast of Israel, very, very well stocked, soon to be joined by the USS Dwight Eisenhower. And yesterday, President Biden saying he's given the authority for an unprecedented military aid package to Israel. And I think that's the US administration warning, don't start, Iran, don't start, because we're here too. And we've got 2 Royal Navy vessels coming from the United Kingdom, as well as some surveillance planes. So I think we've got the West making a collective or sending Iran a collective message saying, don't mess with us. Because if you do, there are going to be consequences.
We know that Iran has been behind so much of the trouble against Israel, and Israel has very cleverly fought back with technology. I heard last night, and maybe you could confirm this, Rolene, that there was some Israeli hackers that had taken down the power grid in Tehran. And we've seen technological attacks against these Ayatollahs over the years. Israel's been very successful. So how does Israel deal with Iran going forward? Because even if this war is successful on these 2 fronts, Iran is still in existence and still an existential threat.
Well, this is the question. Many Israelis are asking, will we be preemptive? How will we deal with them? Right now, it's a very, very delicate military operation because we are at war. So whatever plans there are in existence, I mean, people keep saying to me, what's the situation with the ground offensive? We won't know because unlike previous situations, this is not an escalation or a conflagration. We are on a complete war footing. So the military are keeping any plans very close to their chest, and of course will use whatever they think that the enemy or the public need to hear. They will get that into the public domain. I mean, we heard from the IDF that our next phase may or may not be a ground offensive. So, we're in a wartime situation where we have to understand we're fighting on multiple fronts. We're fighting covert and overt. We're fighting psyops. We're fighting media. We're fighting information. We're fighting on cyber. So there's so many, and we're fighting diplomatically. We're using those channels. So there are so many fronts that exist in the framework of warfare.
So, Rolene, there's a lot of other players here, and we're hearing about Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, even Russia, and their involvement here. Why are these players significant, and how are they involved in all of this?
I think from Jordan and Egypt's perspective, they don't want to see the region descend into chaos. And this is why what the media did with the hospital 2 nights ago was so dangerous, because it's dropping a lit match into a vat of oil and sparking the region. So they're going to want to not descend into chaos. I mean, very interestingly, Jordan and Egypt have said, absolutely, we will not be accepting any Palestinians from Gaza. Absolutely not. And you know, at face value, you think, you know, that's a bit nasty. You know, the Arab world's not taking in Palestinians. No, they know that coming in with those Palestinians will be Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood, and various other kinds of terror parties. So they're going to want to, you know, circle these issues very, very carefully. Russia is a concern, because we know that Putin is hegemonic and could see the Middle East as another area of control. So you will notice the Israeli government juggled that very carefully. President Zelensky wanted to come and express his solidarity, and we said, now's not the time. And I think you can understand that we would have another player coming in opportunistically to attack Israel, or perhaps even ally with the enemy, should that happen. So it's a question of juggling all these different players, all these different balls, while we try and defend this tiny, tiny strip of land.
Rolene, there has been a tremendous amount of unity in Israel, and I know over the past few months when we've talked, there have been some divisions, some protests. Have those pretty much gone away, and are the Israeli people unified right now?
The Israeli people are absolutely unified. There's a saying, you know, if you want to like, don't declare war on the Jews, because nothing unites Israelis and the Jewish state and our diaspora than the threat of a war. We're pretty united now. Yes, there will be a time when Prime Minister Netanyahu and his partners are going to have to answer some very difficult questions. There's no doubt about that. But right now, we are 101% behind our army, behind each other. And as we've said so many times, we will win this. We have to win this. We are in the fight now between good and evil. And we are the vanguard of civilization, because make no mistake, what starts with us doesn't end with us. We're dealing with the forces of evil, and we have to go out to defeat them.
There are so many things that Israel needs right now, in addition to our prayers, which are flowing freely and forthcoming. How can we, as Americans, help you in Israel?
Help us fight the misinformation war. You know, there's always ways to donate, and prayers are enormously important. Give us that spiritual iron dome over our country, which you guys do like nobody else does. You are our spiritual iron dome. But help us in the war against misinformation.
And Rolene, if we want to be in touch with you and follow your work online, because there's a lot of disinformation out there, and you're certainly providing accurate and clear information daily, where can we find you?
You can find me Monday to Thursday on the Israel Brief on YouTube. That's at the Israel Brief. I'm on layoftheland.online, on Facebook, Rolene Marks, and on Twitter at Rolmarks, ROLEMARKS. And I even have another blog. It's rorosrantings.wordpress.com. That's rorosrantings.wordpress.com, because you guys know I can rant a bit.
You certainly can. Rolene Marks, thank you so much for this update, and thank you for joining us today on the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. We continue to pray for Israel.
The gratitude is all mine and all from all of us here in the state of Israel. We have no greater friend than you, your listeners, and the incredible people of the United States of America.